I say shut it, Mary Warren.
Enter John Proctor. On seeing him, Mary Warren leaps in fright. Proctor was a farmer in his middle 30s. He need not have been a partisan of any faction in the town, but there is evidence to suggest that he had a sharp and biting way with hypocrites. He was the kind of man, powerful of body, even-tempered, and not easily led, who cannot refuse support to partisans without drawing their deepest resentment. In Proctor's presence, a fool felt his foolishness instantly, and a Proctor is always marked for calumny, therefore. But as we shall see, the steady manner he displays does not spring from an untroubled soul. He is a sinner not only against the moral fashion of the time, but against his own vision of decent conduct. These people had no ritual for the washing away of sins. It is another trait we inherited from them, and it has helped to discipline us as well as to breed hypocrisy among us. Proctor, respected and even feared in Salem, has come to regard himself as a kind of fraud. But no hint of this has yet appeared on the surface, and as he enters from the crowded parlor below, it is a man in his prime we see, with a quiet confidence and an unexpressed hidden force. Mary Warren, his servant, can barely speak for embarrassment and fear.
Oh, I'm just going home, Mr. Proctor.
Are you foolish, Mary Warren? Be you deaf? I forbid you leave the house, did I not? Why shall I pay you? I am looking for you more often than my cows.
I only come to see the great doings in the world.
I'll show you a great doing on your arse one of these days. Now get you home. My wife is waiting with your work.
I'd best be off. I have my Ruth to watch. Good morning, Mr. Proctor.
Mercy sidles out. Since Proctor's entrance, Abigail has stood as though on tiptoe, absorbing his presence wide-eyed. He glances at her, then goes to Betty on the bed.
Gah! I'd almost forgot how strong you are, John Proctor.
Proctor looking at Abigail now, the faintest suggestion of a knowing smile on his face.
What's this mischief here?
Oh, she's only gone silly somehow.
The road past my house is a pilgrimage to Salem all morning. The town's mumbling witchcraft.
Oh, posh!
Winningly, she comes a little closer, with a confidential, wicked air.
We were dancing in the woods last night, and my uncle leaped in on us. She took fright is all.
You're wicked yet, aren't you? You'll be clapped in the stocks before you're 20.
He takes a step to go, and she springs into his path.
Give me a word, John. A soft word.
Her concentrated desire destroys his smile.
No, Abby, that's done with.
You come 5 mile to see a silly girl fly? I know you better.
I come to see what mischief your uncle's brewing now. Put it out of mind, Abby.
Grasping his hand before he can release her.
John, I am waiting for you every night.
Abby, I never give you hope to wait for me.
I have something better than hope, I think.
Abby, you'll put it out of mind. I'll not be coming for you more.
You're surely sporting with me.
You know me better.
I know how you clutched my back behind your house and sweated like a stallion whenever I come near. Or did I dream that? It's she put me out. You cannot pretend it were you. I saw your face when she put me out, and you loved me then, and you do now.
Abby, that's a wild thing to say.
A wild thing may say wild things, but not so wild, I think. I have seen you since she put me out. I have seen you nights.
I have hardly stepped off my farm this 7 months.
I have a sense for heat, John, and yours has drawn me to my window, and I have seen you looking up, burning in your loneliness. Do you tell me you've never looked up at my window?
I may have looked up.
And you must. You are no wintry man. I know you, John. I know you. I cannot sleep for dreaming. I cannot dream, but I wake and walk about the house as though I'd find you coming through some door.
She clutches him desperately. gently pressing her from him with great sympathy but firmly.
Child.
How do you call me child?
Abby, I may think of you softly from time to time, but I will cut off my hand before I'll ever reach for you again. Wipe it out of mind. We never touched, Abby.
Aye, but we did.
Aye, but we did not.
Oh, I marvel how such a strong man may let such a sickly wife
You'll
be...
speak nothing of a...
She is blackening my name in the village. She is telling lies about me. She is a cold, sniveling woman, and you bend to her, let her turn you
Do
like...
you look for whipping?
I look for John Proctor, that took me from my sleep and put knowledge in my heart. I never knew what pretense Salem was. I never knew the lying lessons I was taught by all these Christian women and their covenanted men. And now you bid me tear the light out of my eyes? I will not. I cannot. You loved me, John Proctor. And whatever sin it is, you love me yet.
He turns abruptly to go out. She rushes to him.
John, pity me. Pity me. Me.
The words going up to Jesus are heard in the psalm, and Betty claps her ears suddenly and whines loudly.
Betty?
She hurries to Betty, who is now sitting up and screaming. Proctor goes to Betty as Abigail is trying to pull her hands down, calling,
Betty!
What's she doing? Girl, what ails you? Stop that wailing!
The singing has stopped in the midst of this, and now Paris rushes in.
What happened? What are you doing to her? Betty!
He rushes to the bed, crying,
Betty! Betty! Betty!
Mrs. Putnam enters, feverish with curiosity, and with her Thomas Putnam and Mercy Lewis. Paris at the bed keeps lightly slapping Betty's face, while she moans and tries to get up.
She heard you singing, and suddenly she's up and screaming.
The psalm. The psalm. She cannot bear to hear the Lord's name.
No, God forbid. Mercy, run to the doctor. Tell him what's happened here.
Mercy Lewis rushes out.
Mark it for a sign. Mark it.
Rebecca Nurse, 72, enters. She is white-haired, leaning upon her walking stick.
That is a notorious sign of witchcraft afoot. Goody nurse, a prodigious sign. Prodigious sign.
My mother told me that. When they cannot bear to hear the name of
Rebecca, go to her. We're lost. She suddenly cannot bear to hear the Lord.
Giles Corey, 83, enters. He is knotted with muscle, canny, inquisitive, and still powerful.
There is hard sickness here, Giles Corey, so please to keep the quiet.
I've not said a word. No one here can testify I've said a word. Is she going to fly again? I hear she fly.
Man, be quiet now.
Everything is quiet. Rebecca walks across the room to the bed. Gentleness exudes from her. Betty is quietly whimpering, eyes shut. Rebecca simply stands over the child, who gradually quiets. And while they are so absorbed, we may put a word in for Rebecca. Rebecca was the wife of Francis Nurse, who from all accounts was one of those men for whom both sides of the argument had to have respect. He was called upon to arbitrate disputes as though he were an unofficial judge, and Rebecca also enjoyed the high opinion most people had for him. By the time of the delusion they had 300 acres, and their children were settled in separate homesteads within the same estate. However, Francis had originally rented the land, and one theory has it that as he gradually paid for it and raised his social status, there were those who resented his rise. Another suggestion to explain the systematic campaign against Rebecca and inferentially against Francis, is the land war he fought with his neighbors, one of whom was a Putnam. This squabble grew to the proportions of a battle in the woods between partisans of both sides, and it is said to have lasted for 2 days. As for Rebecca herself, the general opinion of her character was so high that to explain how anyone dared cry her out for a witch, and more, how adults could bring themselves to lay hands on her, we must look to the fields and boundaries of that time. As we have seen, Thomas Putnam's man for the Salem ministry was Bailey. The Nurse clan had been in the faction that prevented Bailey's taking office. In addition, certain families allied to the Nurses by blood or friendship, and whose farms were contiguous with the Nurse farm or close to it, combined to break away from the Salem town authority and set up Topsfield, a new and independent entity whose existence was resented by old Salemites. That the guiding hand behind the outcry was Putnam's is indicated by the fact that as soon as it began, this Topsfield Nurse faction absented themselves from church in protest and disbelief. It was Edward and Jonathan Putnam who signed the first complaint against Rebecca, and Thomas Putnam's little daughter was the one who fell into a fit at the hearing and pointed to Rebecca as her attacker. To top it all, Mrs. Putnam, who is now staring at the bewitched child on the bed, soon accused Rebecca's spirit of tempting her to iniquity, a charge that had more truth in it than Mrs. Putnam could know.
What have you done?
Rebecca, in thought, now leaves the bedside and sits.
What do you make of it, Rebecca?
Goody Nurse, will you go to my Ruth and see if you can wake her?
I think she'll wake in time. Pray calm yourselves. I have 11 children, and I am 26 times a grandma, and I have seen them all through their silly seasons. And when I come on them, they will run the devil bow-legged, keeping up with their mischief. I think she'll wake when she tires of it. A child's spirit is like a child. You can never catch it by running after it. You must stand still, and for love, it will soon itself come back.
Aye, that's the truth of it, Rebecca.